Now, let's move a little bit more into the micro of the Outlaws season. And the first one I'd like to start with was a bit of a weird criticism, and let's see if you can make sense of the rationale there. But like people,
I think I'm actually going to have content coming up about this, so I'll definitely give an answer here, and I'll give a very in-depth one in the content
for sure. So to explain what this was about, of course, you had a very unique situation with Jake being both a player.
Oh, never mind. This is a different scenario.
Okay, about a player and a coach on the same team, and
sure.
I mean, I don't think it was a major point. I think, was it Super who said this? That basically, like, you as a player want to play as much as possible, and a coach can make it that they are playing as much as possible. So there's a certain conflict of interest where the player's mentality is to always want to play. The coach, in his coaching position, he now has the ability to influence that. Did you understand the whole discussion around the conflict of interest around Jake as a player coach?
I mean, there's absolutely a conflict of interest, but one thing that he did say to us at the very beginning, because he was signed as a player and a coach, was that he asked if he can be left out of discussions like when he would be playing, and asked if just Junk and I could talk about that, because I mean, obviously he's going to hear part of it just being in the room with us and stuff like that, but I think he also understood that it was a conflict of interest and that he didn't really want to be influencing it that much. So, I understand Super's perspective, but also Jake knew that more than anybody, and so that's why he asked to be kind of recused from that. I think obviously he did split. He played a tiny bit of DPS when we wanted a Junkrat specialist. Actually ended up undefeated on DPS this season. I don't know if people have realized that, but I think he has 3 map wins and 0 losses. But yes. But in terms of support, we rotated him and Juby depending on what the team needed at the time. And I think one thing that Jake provides, especially when the team was struggling, was he could provide some central, he's someone that won't stop talking if like things are hard. So, if we're having like a bad time in scrims and we need leadership, then he's the one that can kind of band-aid that issue and patch it up. And he was able to help us that way. So, he also doesn't have bad mechanics for a Brig player. So obviously he played it quite a bit during GOATs. And so he definitely had reasons to play. And I don't think he influenced it very much. It was generally just what the team needed at the time that determined whether he would be playing or not.
I remember, wasn't it the Boston series where you then decided to go with Juby instead of Jake? What was that idea?
We played during stage 3. We played Juby. I think we played Juby only. I think that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Juby isn't mechanically like a weak player, so I think that we wanted him to use that stage as like the time to develop it more, especially when stage 1, stage 2 he was swapping out for Brig, so he was barely getting experience on it. I think we saw that stage as a way to like give him more time and get him more integrated on the role. I think that obviously that stage we ended up, I won't say having a bad read of the meta, but we ended up playing something we weren't, like a matchup we weren't comfortable against Boston and Dallas at the very end of the stage. So that was definitely rough, but I don't think we can just like blame I guess Juby for that. It was more like we just had an underlying issue as in terms of our meta read, and then it was exposed, I guess, during the last week of that stage.
Yeah. Now I'm kind of curious what the topic was that you were going to create content on. Can you give us like a...
Oh, it was the plan A and plan B thing.
Ah, right. Yes, that's also a great topic. I'm looking forward to that, because that is one of the big enigmas, I think, the big differences that the fans have in the perception of how they think teams prepare for the
Yeah,
season.
I think it's not just I guess it's not just a perception of Houston that they have wrong. It's a perception of what all the teams do in preparation that they have wrong,
Mhm.
or that every team has like multiple plans and practices multiple plans throughout the week and stuff like that. It's just that some teams find that they're stronger when they grind one comp and feel like they can play it into every matchup and know, the intricacies and stuff like that. And then some teams have a base like an approach where they think a certain comp is just the strongest on a map, and they want to take the 60-40 matchup every time and stuff like that. So, it's not really a plan A versus plan B. It's just every team has different plan A's. I think
Yes.
that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. Now, another thing that was kind of interesting to see, and I think that was mildly confusing, was both the position that Django found himself in, but also like why you guys required Dreamer this season. Now, to be honest, I didn't know a lot about Django when he came into the season. It felt like because he had good mechanics, he would be someone like that excels at Winston. Then he somehow had like, at least the community thought, was like a Rhine specialist or something. And then you brought on Dreamer, who was generally also probably more known for his Rhine during his stint in the league. So where is our perception, the community perception of those two players wrong, and why did you require Dreamer?
I feel like they have very different styles. And also I think that they had very different English proficiency levels. I do really think Jungkook is like a super talented player. Like, I think in the last interview that we had, I said that like mechanically he was one of the most like outstanding players in all of our tryouts, and I still feel that way. Like, his mechanics are really, really strong. I think his unfortunately, like his English, he was like very new to English when he joined the team, and so I think it was hard to communicate like very long ideas with him, or just like have lengthy conversations in English. It'd have to be going back and forth in English and Korean. And so I think Dreamer was someone that you can like, that has a really good English level, and that the players can like change plans on the fly with him. I think that Dreamer and Jungkook also, I think Jungkook's more of like what is it like? I'd say in terms of Dreamer's playstyle, it's more like trying to like, I'm trying to describe this well, but maybe the words aren't coming well. But basically, I think like it's very much like a brainy playstyle, if that makes sense. And then Jungkook has like the balls to the wall kind of playstyle.
Mm-hmm.
So they have different playstyles and different proficiencies in English, and that's kind of why we wanted to have a second option. I think they're both like strong players, and obviously neither are on Houston anymore. I definitely think that they should at least both be looked at going into Overwatch 2. Jungkook especially has a DPS background, so I feel like he can pick up characters probably pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
But his mechanics are really, really strong. So I hope they're both back in the league. But I think that what we needed from the two of them was just different at different times, and that's why we had two options. It is funny that Jungkook ended up becoming like, I guess, known as a Rhine specialist, because I actually didn't. His perception of himself was that his Rhine was his strongest character.
Mm-hmm.
But our perception of him wasn't that actually at the beginning, and then it became more clear that it was true.
Mm-hmm.
But his Winston mechanics were really good. Like, even in tryouts, even when his team was like, let's say like losing in tryouts, he'd clearly be individually popping off, and like his Winston mechanics were really good. I remember we had players talking to us during the tryouts about his ball, and they were saying like his ball mechanics were insane as well. So like, I think he's and always, I don't know how, but his Orisa damage numbers were always super high, and his pulls are really good. So I think he's just overall like a mechanically strong player. And I think, I hope to see both of them back in the league in particular.
For sure. Now, one guy who's going to be back in the league, and pretty much the last one standing from the big rebuild, is Piggy. Now, how much were you involved in like the plan for the next season? And then do you also make sense to I mean, you're not directly building around Piggy, but to have him be sort of like the guy that's still around.
So I did make the coaches aware early that I was sorry, there's a fly in here, that I was planning to retire. So they did know that I like wouldn't be a part of the full rebuild or anything like that. I did give them, I guess, my thoughts and like people that I thought they should go after and things about like who to keep and who to not. But in the end, it's just the team's current staff's decision. So for Piggy, I think it does make a lot of sense. I think he was the player that improved the most on our team last year. His Sigma was always really, really good. His Diva went from his weakest character to he became a pretty strong Diva at the end of the year, I would say. His Arya has good mechanics. His grabs, I think that they still need a little bit of work, but I'm sure he can do it. So and then he's always playing main tank on the ladder for whatever reason. So he's somebody that's going to be, I think, like a strong player for Overwatch 2 when there's so many. I mean, presumably there are going to be so many heroes. You know, we don't know how many tanks they're adding or anything like that. But I definitely think he'll be strong in all the off tank characters, and potentially can learn some of the main tank characters. I don't know if Outlaws is going to go with 2 tanks or 1 tank or something, but I'm assuming they'd probably pick up a main tank as well to, you know, for whenever the meta favors it. But he, not only is he a strong player, I think he's also very friendly and like creates a good environment. So I think that it's not a coincidence that both him and Dante were well, I guess he was retained and then Dante was re-signed. Both are like very friendly and like easygoing, but also competitive. So I think that they're like the right kind of people that you'd want in a good team environment, I would say.
Right. Now, I guess as a closing question, you don't have to do it, but it's fun to sort of speculate or hypothesize how you would do it. How do you build a team for a game that you have played 0 minutes and only have a rough idea what the final cut will actually be about? What would your strategy be for this offseason?
This might be a little bit scathing, but I'm actually really irritated about Blizzard's approach to like helping these teams build. Like, you're asking these people to gamble with like a lot of money, basically. Like, people that you should have their best interest in mind, and they shouldn't be gambling. Like, they should be building these teams and having. All right, every offseason is gambling to some degree because you don't know what the meta is going to be like the next year, but you definitely have, at least you understand the fundamentals of the game, and you understand kind of in general what tools you have to work with. You don't know any of that for Overwatch 2. Like, for example, you know, they played a build where it seemed like Ryan and Zarya were reworked, or not reworked. They had, you know, slight tweaks to their kit, and then Sombra and Bastion were reworked. It didn't look like anything else about Overwatch changed other than, you know, them playing on push. I don't know how you can draw anything from that and say, yeah, that's how these characters are going to be in Overwatch 2. Like, we don't know anything about Overwatch 2, to be clear. Like a lot of these characters that are currently in the game, they've even talked about like Doom being a tank and stuff like that. Like, we don't. It's fundamentally going to be a really different game. I think one of the things about Overwatch 2 or about Overwatch as well is that like there's always characters that are permanently going to be in the meta, and then there's characters that don't see playtime. Like, you can have a pretty good idea that like Tracer is going to be meta, for instance. It's only not been meta in GOATs. You can have a pretty good idea that you'll need a strong Zenana, that you'll need a Lucio, stuff like that. You don't know that about Overwatch 2. So you're just asking people to gamble, I feel like, and it's not right that people's job is just guessing. So that being said, I think your question was not what I just
you
answered.
Can't choose. You have to.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you choose? I personally, I guess my personal philosophy is you don't want to have a super big roster, just because it makes the synergies easier, and you just like, if you're Shanghai, for example, you can have the same 6 players in all the time, or, you know, 5, I guess, next year. We have seen leaks about them, but there's like some very strong flex DPS that were on the market this year and would be a really good basis to build your team around. I would probably try and have 3 DPS. I'd say 2 flex DPS and then 1 who's like very specialized at hit scan. Just because this year, for example, there were teams that were able to not play hit scan at all during the whole entire year. So, and I think it's very rare that there's going to be a double hit scan meta. I guess you never know, but you know, that would be my guess. So I feel like that'd be a good use of resources. I would probably have like one person that classically plays main tank and one person that classically plays off tank and add them to the roster and trust that they'd also be able to pick up heroes in each other's role. And then it gets tricky when you talk about supports, because personally, I think the way I feel and what a lot of people in the Overwatch League probably feel is that in general, flex supports seem to have a higher skill cap than main supports. There's like a few exceptions, but in general, it seems to hold pretty true. So the safest bet would probably be to have two flex supports rather, and have one of them pick up like classical main support heroes. Like, you know, people have always played Mercy, but then there's Lucio's the elephant in the room, and you'd probably want to ask one of your supports to pick that up. So that makes the most sense to me. Or you just pick up 2 flex supports and a main support, but that's a pretty big roster for, and you don't really want to spend all your money now. You probably want to wait and see how Overwatch 2 develops. But even all of that is a gamble because we don't know when the public will get access to Overwatch 2 versus when Overwatch League players will have access to Overwatch 2. We don't even know if Tier 2 is going to have access to Overwatch 2. So it's like, there's so many issues with this way of thinking that only Blizzard can answer, and it doesn't seem like they have the answers right now. So it's just high stakes gambling. I would personally say 2 flex supports, 3 DPS, 2 hit scan. 2 flex, 1 hit scan, and then an off tank and a main tank. Those 7 players, probably a good place to have your roster, but then you're going to want to have also some room left over to edit that roster in the future. So I think that makes the most sense to me.
Right. Then we'll see how that develops. I mean, I think the position of a general manager is not the most desired at this point in time, and you definitely
not
can
very
make
fun right now.
A lot of mistakes. But thank you for the interview, and best of luck in your next endeavors.
Thank you for having me, Iska.